They tried to use fear gas on the human. He inhaled it and said, "Smells like home." Part 1. Welcome to the Nightmare Chamber. The capture captain, Sarah. Chen had been exploring the outer rim of the Andromeda sector when the Vorthok ships appeared. 3 massive vessels, each one bristling with weapons that could crack a moon in half. Her little exploration craft, the Wanderer, didn't stand a chance. The tractor beam pulled her in like a fish on a line, and Sarah found herself face to face with the galaxy's most feared interrogators. The Vorthok were legends in the worst possible way. Their empire stretched across dozens of star systems, built not through conquest but through terror. They had perfected the art of psychological warfare to a science. Their prison stations were spoken of in whispers across the galaxy, places where the strongest minds were reduced to gibbering madness within hours. Sarah was dragged through corridors, lined with what looked like trophy cases. Each one contained a different alien species, frozen in expressions of absolute terror. The Vorthok guards, tall insectoid beings with compound eyes that reflected light like black mirrors, chittered to each other in their clicking language. Sarah caught enough words to understand they were discussing her probable breaking point. New species, one guard clicked. Bipedal soft-skinned, should break quickly. Commander Zixtok will enjoy this one, another replied. It's been cycles since we've had fresh material. Sarah was pushed into a cell that defied description. The walls shifted and writhed like living tissue, covered in patterns that seemed to move when she wasn't looking directly at them. The air itself felt thick and oppressive, designed to create immediate psychological distress. Strange sounds echoed from hidden speakers, screams, whispers, and sounds that had no name in any language. Most beings would have been reduced to panic within minutes. Sarah looked around the cell, taking mental notes. The walls were clearly some kind of biomechanical hybrid, probably responding to electromagnetic fields. The sounds were carefully engineered to trigger fight-or-flight responses in various species. It was actually quite impressive from a technical standpoint. "Interesting," she murmured, running her hand along one of the writhing walls. "Feels like that weird jello my college roommate used to make." The interrogator Commander Zixtok was a master of his craft. He had broken the minds of the galaxy's most hardened warriors, turning proud soldiers into sobbing wrecks who would reveal their deepest secrets just to make the psychological torture stop. His interrogation chamber was a work of art, designed to exploit the primal fears embedded in every known species. The chamber itself was a masterpiece of psychological engineering. Holographic projectors created shifting landscapes of nightmare. The air recyclers could pump in pheromones that triggered specific emotional responses. The floor could become transparent, showing an endless void beneath. Every surface, every sound, every smell was calibrated to create maximum psychological distress. Sarah was brought in, still wearing her torn exploration suit. Her short black hair was disheveled, and there was a small cut on her forehead from the capture, but she walked with the casual confidence of someone heading to a business meeting. Zixtok studied her through his compound eyes, analyzing her posture, her breathing, her micro-expressions. "Human," he said, in perfectly translated standard. "You are the first of your species we have encountered. Consider yourself fortunate to contribute to our understanding." "Thanks, I guess," Sarah replied, looking around the chamber with genuine curiosity. "This is pretty elaborate. Must have taken a lot of work to set up." Zixtok's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "Indeed. This chamber has broken the minds of warriors from 47 different species. Each hologram, each sound, each scent is carefully chosen to trigger the deepest, most primal fears known to sentient life. 47 species, Sarah repeated, sounding impressed. That's quite a collection. Do you keep records? I'd love to see the psychological profiles. The interrogator paused. In all his cycles of service, no prisoner had ever asked to see his research notes. You, ... wish to study my methods. Well, yeah. I'm an explorer. Learning about new things is kind of my job. Sarah looked around the shifting chamber walls. Is this based on evolutionary psychology? The fear responses, I mean. The first test Sixtic decided to begin with something simple. He activated the void projection, causing the floor to become transparent and show an endless fall into black space. Most species had an instinctive fear of falling, of being lost in an infinite void. It was one of the most reliable triggers. In his arsenal, Sarah looked down at her feet, watching the stars wheel by in the simulated abyss below. Oh, cool. It's like a glass-bottom boat, but for space. She sat down on the transparent floor, peering into the artificial void. The star field is really well done. Is that based on actual astronomical data? The interrogator's confidence wavered slightly. He activated the next sequence, shadowy figures that moved just at the edge of vision, triggering paranoia and the fear of being hunted. Dark shapes slithered across the walls, always disappearing when looked at directly. Sarah said, watching the shadows dance. Classic peripheral vision exploitation. Very clever. We have something similar on Earth. It's called floaters in your eyes. Super annoying when you're trying to read. Zixthok's mandibles clicked rapidly in frustration. He engaged the auditory assault, a mixture of screams, whispers, and sounds specifically designed to trigger fear responses. The chamber filled with the sounds of death and madness from dozens of different species. Sarah tilted her head, listening. The acoustic design is really sophisticated. You're using subsonic frequencies to trigger anxiety, right? We discovered that technique back in the 20th century. My neighbor used to play his music with way too much bass, sounded just like this. Impossible, Zixtok muttered, switching to the olfactory assault. Vents opened, releasing scents of decay, predator pheromones, and chemical compounds that triggered disgust and fear in every known species. Sarah took a deep breath. Okay, that's definitely ... pungent. Smells like that time the garbage disposal broke in my apartment building. Mixed with ... double quotes, she took another sniff. Is that sulfur? Kind of like when they were doing construction near the sewage treatment plant. The growing confusion, the interrogator was beginning to experience something he had never felt before, doubt. His methods were perfect, refined over centuries of practice. They worked on every species, without exception. Yet this human seemed not just unafraid, but genuinely interested in his techniques. You feel no fear, he stated, more to himself than to Sarah. Oh, I feel fear all the time, Sarah replied cheerfully. I'm terrified of forgetting to pay my taxes, running out of coffee during a long space journey, and those automated customer service systems that never understand what you're asking for. Zixthork's compound eyes focused on her with intense concentration. But you show no response to mortal peril, to the threat of death. Well, death is just kind of inevitable, isn't it? Sarah said with a shrug. I mean, I'm probably going to die eventually anyway. Might as well be doing something interesting when it happens. The interrogator activated his personal combat suite, a series of holographic projectors that created the illusion of being attacked by the most feared predators from various worlds. Massive creatures with razor-sharp claws and teeth like swords materialized around Sarah, snarling and reaching for her. She looked around at the projected monsters with the same interest she might show in a museum exhibit. These are really well done. The detail work is amazing. Is this one based on actual predators from your homeworld? She pointed at a creature that looked like a cross between a spider and a tiger. The shadow maw of Vorthok Prime, Zixthok said automatically. It hunts in the deep caverns beneath our cities. Its bite can dissolve bone. Fascinating. We have something similar on Earth. It's called a brown recluse spider. Tiny little thing, but its bite can cause necrosis. Of course, we also have things like grizzly bears, great white sharks, and Australian everything. Sarah paused thoughtfully. Actually, now that I think about it, Australia might be the most dangerous place in the known universe. Pretty much everything there is trying to kill you. The breaking point Sixthick was beginning to understand that he was dealing with something unprecedented. His methods weren't just failing, they were being casually dismissed. The human seemed to find his most terrifying techniques mildly interesting at best. He decided to try a different approach. Instead of trying to frighten her, he would try to understand her. Tell me about your world, human. What is it like? Sarah's eyes lit up. Oh, Earth is amazing. It's this beautiful blue-green planet with all sorts of incredible environments. We have oceans that cover most of the surface, mountains that reach into the sky, deserts that stretch for thousands of miles, and forests full of more species than you can imagine. It sounds pleasant, Zixthok said carefully. Well, it's also incredibly dangerous, Sarah continued enthusiastically. The weather alone can kill you in dozens of different ways. We have hurricanes that can level cities, tornadoes that can pick up houses and throw them around like toys, and blizzards that can freeze you solid in minutes. The revelation as Sarah continued, describing her homeworld. Zixthok began to understand something that shook him to his core. The humans hadn't developed in a normal environment. They had evolved on what could only be described as a death world, a planet so hostile that survival required adaptations that went beyond the physical. Your species, he said slowly, has adapted to constant danger. Pretty much, Sarah agreed. We're basically anxiety. We assume something is going to try to kill us at any moment, so we're always ready for it. Makes it hard to relax, but great for survival. The interrogator looked round his chamber of horrors with new eyes. Every technique he had developed, every method of psychological warfare was designed to exploit the fear of death and danger. But what did you do with a species that had already accepted death as a constant companion? The fear gas, he said suddenly. Our ultimate weapon. It has never failed. Oh, you have gas weapons too? Sarah asked with interest. We've been using those for centuries. Tear gas, pepper spray, chemical weapons. We've pretty much weaponized everything, including fear itself. Zixthok realized with growing horror that he was no longer the interrogator. He was the one being studied, analyzed, and catalogued. The human had turned his own chamber into a research opportunity, and he was helping her do it. I must consult with my superiors, he said, backing toward the door. Sure thing, Sarah replied. This has been really educational. Thanks for the tour. As the door sealed behind him, Zixthok realized he had just experienced something no Vorthok had ever felt before. He had been intimidated by a prisoner who wasn't even trying to be threatening. The human had simply described her normal existence, and it had been more terrifying than anything in his arsenal. For the first time in his long career, The galaxy's most feared interrogator felt a chill of genuine fear. Asterisk, just another Tuesday. Morning, the ultimate weapon. The Vorthok High Command emergency session was unprecedented. Never before had a single prisoner caused such confusion among their ranks. Zixtok's report read like a work of fiction, a being that found their most sophisticated torture methods interesting and educational. Supreme Commander Vorthak, the architect of their psychological warfare doctrine, studied the recordings with his elite staff. "This cannot be accurate," he declared, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never been wrong. "No species can be immune to fear. It is the most fundamental emotion in the universe." "Perhaps the human is defective," suggested one of his advisors. "Brain damaged or artificially enhanced." "The scans show normal neural activity," Zixtok replied. "If anything, her brain function is more complex than average. She's not broken, she's adapted." The Supreme Commander's compound eyes reflected. The holographic displays showing Sarah's casual reactions to their most terrifying techniques. "Then we use the ultimate weapon. Deploy nightmare gas MK7. A collective shudder ran through the assembled officers. The gas had been developed over centuries, refined through testing on thousands of subjects. It was a psychoactive compound that bypassed conscious thought and triggered the deepest, most primal fears embedded in the genetic memory of every species they had encountered. The gas didn't just cause fear, it caused madness. It reached into the evolutionary history of a species and awakened every terror their ancestors had ever faced. Predators that had hunted them, environments that had killed them, disasters that had shaped their development. All of it came flooding back in a wave of pure, undiluted horror. "Sir," Zixtok said carefully, "perhaps we should study her more first. She might be valuable for research." "She is valuable," the Supreme Commander agreed. "Dead, her autopsy will teach us more about human psychology than any interrogation. Deploy the gas." The gas chamber. Sarah had spent the night in her cell, taking notes on the psychological techniques she had observed. Her explorer's training included basic xenopsychology, and she was genuinely fascinated by the Vorthok approach to fear-based interrogation. It was crude, but effective at least. It would be against species that hadn't evolved on a planet actively trying to kill them. The guards came for her at what she assumed was morning, though time was difficult to judge on a space station. They seemed more nervous than before, their chittering conversations full of words she didn't recognize. She was brought to a different chamber, this one sterile and clinical rather than theatrical. "Ah, the human returns," said a new voice. Sarah looked up to see a Vorthok even larger than Zixtok, his carapace marked with scars that spoke of centuries of experience. "I am Supreme Commander Vorthok. Your species has proven troublesome." "Nice to meet you," Sarah replied. "I have to say, your facility is really impressive. The psychological engineering is decades ahead of anything we've developed." The Supreme Commander studied her with the intensity of a scientist examining a new specimen. "You find our methods impressive?" "Absolutely. The integration of multiple sensory inputs, the use of evolutionary psychology to trigger specific responses. It's brilliant work. Horrifying, but brilliant. Today you will experience our final technique," Vorthak said, gesturing to the chamber. "Around them, we have perfected the art of fear itself. This gas will show you terrors beyond your comprehension." Sarah looked around the chamber with professional interest. It was smaller than the previous one, with visible ventilation systems and what appeared to be medical monitoring equipment. "Gas-based delivery system. That's actually pretty clever. harder to ignore than visual or auditory stimuli. The gas reaches directly into your genetic memory, the Supreme Commander explained, apparently unable to resist detailing his masterpiece. It awakens every fear your species has ever known. Predators, natural disasters, disease, death, all of it experienced simultaneously. Genetic memory, huh? Sarah nodded appreciatively. We've done some research into that. Most of our fears are actually learned behaviors, but there are some deep-seated ones that seem to be hardwired. Should be interesting to see what you've managed to dig up. The deployment Verth stepped back to the observation chamber, where dozens of Vorthok scientists and military officers had gathered to witness the breaking of the human. Cameras recorded every angle, sensors monitored every biological function, and the finest minds in the Empire analyzed every detail. Deploy the gas, the Supreme Commander ordered. Vents opened throughout the chamber, releasing a pale green mist that seemed to move with purpose. It swirled around Sarah like a living thing, seeking entry through her respiratory system. The gas was heavier than air, designed to pool around its victims and force them to breathe it whether they wanted to or not. The assembled observers watched their monitors intently. Heart rate, brain activity, stress hormones, all the indicators that should spike to dangerous levels as the gas took effect. They waited for the screaming to begin. Sarah took a deep breath, sampling the air. She said, tilting her head. Thoughtfully, that's actually kind of familiar. The monitoring equipment showed normal readings. Her heart rate was steady, her brain activity showed curiosity rather than fear, and her stress hormones were within normal parameters. Increase the concentration, Vorthak ordered. More gas poured into the chamber. Sarah was now standing in a cloud of the most potent, fear-inducing substance ever created, breathing it in with every breath. The concentration was high enough to drive a grown Vorthok warrior insane within seconds. You know what this reminds me of? Sarah said, her voice slightly muffled by the gas. Tuesday mornings in downtown Los Angeles. That mix of car exhaust, industrial pollution, and whatever they use to clean the subway systems. The impossible reaction, the observation chamber was silent except for the clicking of mandibles as the Vorthok tried to process what they were seeing. The gas that had broken the minds of beings from across the galaxy was being compared to urban air pollution. Perhaps she's not breathing it properly, suggested one scientist. As if in response, Sarah took an even deeper breath. Actually, this is way cleaner than LA smog. At least it doesn't have that underlying smell of desperation and broken dreams. Impossible, Vorthak muttered. The gas is designed to trigger every fear response in her genetic code. She should be experiencing the terror of every predator that ever hunted her species. Oh, I can feel something, Sarah said, sitting down cross-legged in the gas cloud. It's like ... a mild tingling sensation. Kind of like when you're about to get a cold, but not quite. She paused, considering. Actually, it's making me a little homesick. Homesick? Zixtok asked weakly. Yeah, it reminds me of camping in Yellowstone, you know, sitting around a campfire, breathing in that mix of wood smoke and natural gas from the geothermal vents, plus that underlying scent of sulfur and whatever chemicals the Park Service uses to keep the bears away. The Supreme Commander's voice was barely a whisper. The bears, oh, Yellowstone has the most amazing wildlife. Grizzly bears, black bears, wolves, mountain lions, bison that can trample you flat, and geysers that can boil you alive if you fall. It's like nature's own little death trap, but with gift shops. Sarah continued talking, her voice growing more animated as the gas seemed to make her more talkative rather than more terrified. Actually, this whole experience is reminding me of a camping trip I took with my family when I was 12. We were hiking in the mountains when this storm rolled in, lightning, hail, flash floods, the works. We had to take shelter in this cave, and it turned out to be home to a family of bears. What happened? One of the scientists asked, despite himself. Well, the bears weren't too happy about us being there, and we weren't too happy about them being there, but the storm was worse than either of us. So we just kind of ... shared the cave for the night. The bears kept to their side, we kept to ours, and everybody tried to ignore the fact that we were probably all going to die of exposure. The breakdown as Sarah continued her story, something unprecedented began happening in the observation chamber. The Vorthok, who had built their entire civilization on the weaponization of fear, were beginning to experience it themselves. She's describing a death world, one scientist whispered, a planet where survival requires constant vigilance against multiple simultaneous threats. The predators, she mentions, another added, they're not genetic memories, they're current threats, the environmental hazards, a third scientist said, his voice shaking. Storms, floods, volcanic activity, seismic events, they're all active on her homeworld. Supreme Commander Vorthak was studying the recordings with growing horror. She's not broken by the gas because she's already adapted to fear. Her entire species has evolved to function while under constant threat. It's worse than that, Zik said quietly. She's not just adapted to fear, she's bored by it. What we consider ultimate psychological warfare, she considers a mild inconvenience. The realization hit the assembled Vorthok like a physical blow. They had built their empire on the assumption that all species shared their fear responses. But humans hadn't just conquered their fears, they had industrialized them, weaponized them, and turned them into entertainment. Sir, one of the monitoring technicians said, the gas is having an effect, just not the one we expected. What do you mean? Vorthak demanded. Her dopamine levels are increasing. She's enjoying this. The revelation Sarah had finished her camping story and was now describing her childhood in what she called Tornado Alley, a region of her planet where violent storms regularly destroyed entire communities. She spoke of it with the same casual tone someone might use to describe a shopping trip. The thing about living with constant natural disasters, she was saying, is that you develop a really good sense of perspective. Like, okay, there's a mile-wide tornado heading straight for your house. That's bad, but you've got about 20 minutes to get to the storm cellar, and after that, it's just a matter of waiting it out. You ... wait out tornadoes? Zixstock asked. Sure, what else can you do? They're faster than you, stronger than you, and they don't negotiate. So you prepare for them, take reasonable precautions, and then just deal with whatever happens. Sarah shrugged. It's like life, really. Dangerous, unpredictable, probably going to kill you eventually. But what are you going to do? Stop living? The Supreme Commander realized with crystalline clarity that they had made a fundamental error in their understanding of the universe. They had assumed that fear was universal, that all species would respond to threats the same way. But humanity had evolved past that. They had looked at a universe full of things trying to kill them and decided to keep going anyway. The gas, he said suddenly. She said it makes her homesick because it reminds her of her natural environment, Zixstock replied. We've been trying to frighten her with conditions that are, to her, normal. Not normal, one of the scientists corrected. Comfortable. She finds our ultimate weapon comforting. The escape. As the Vorthok struggled to process this information, Sarah had reached a decision. The gas wasn't harmful. If anything, it was mildly pleasant. But she had learned what she needed to know about her captors. They were psychologically sophisticated but had a critical weakness. They had never encountered real adversity. "You know," she said, standing up in the gas cloud, "I appreciate the hospitality, but I should probably be getting back to my ship. I've got a schedule to keep." "You are our prisoner," Vorthak said, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "Am I?" Sarah asked. "I mean, your security seems to be based on the assumption that I'll be too terrified to try anything. But I'm not terrified. I'm not even particularly worried. So what's actually stopping me from leaving?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. The truth was, their entire detention system was psychological. They had never needed physical restraints because no prisoner had ever been functional enough to use them. Sarah walked to the door of the gas chamber. It was locked, but the mechanism was designed to keep panicked, irrational beings contained. She studied it for a moment, then began working on the control panel. "Stop," Vorthak ordered. "Guards, stop her." But the guards were as shaken as their commanders. They had been trained to manage terrified prisoners, not casually confident. Ones who treated their ultimate weapons as minor inconveniences. Sarah had the door open in less than a minute. "Thanks for the experience," she said, stepping into the corridor. "Really educational. I'll make sure to include your techniques in my report to Earth Command." "Earth Command?" Zixtok asked weakly. "Oh, did I not mention? I'm a scout for the Terran Exploration Corps. We're always looking for new species to make contact with. I'm sure they'll be very interested in your psychological warfare techniques." The implications hit the Vorthok like a meteor strike. If this human was a scout, that meant there were more of them. Many more. An entire species of beings who found their ultimate weapons amusing. The returned Sarah made her way back to her ship with minimal interference. The Vorthok guards seemed uncertain how to handle a prisoner who wasn't actually afraid of them. Their entire training was based on managing terrified, broken beings, not someone who walked through their station like a tourist. She found the wanderer in the docking bay, apparently unharmed. The Vorthok had likely intended to study it after her interrogation was complete. Sarah ran through her pre-flight checklist, noting with professional interest that they had installed some kind of tracking device. She left it in place, let them follow her back to Earth if they wanted. They were in for quite a surprise. As her ship cleared the station, Sarah opened a communication channel to Earth Command. "This is Captain Chen, reporting successful first contact with the Vorthok Empire. Classification: technologically advanced, psychologically sophisticated, but critically vulnerable to species with high fear tolerance." "Any immediate threats, Captain?" came the reply. Sarah looked back at the massive station shrinking behind her. "None that I can see. They specialize in psychological warfare, but their techniques are about as scary as a haunted house at a county fair. I'd recommend sending a diplomatic team. I think they could learn a lot from us." "Understood, Captain. What's your assessment of their military capabilities?" "Impressive technology, but they've never faced real adversity. They're basically the galactic equivalent of that kid who's never been in a real fight but thinks he's tough because he plays violent video games." Sarah paused. "Actually, I kind of feel bad for them. They're going to have a hard time adjusting to the reality that fear isn't universal." The aftermath back on the Terra station, the Vorthok were conducting their own post-mission analysis. The results were unprecedented and deeply disturbing. Their ultimate weapon had not just failed, It had been actively enjoyed by its target. We need to reconsider our entire strategic doctrine, Supreme Commander Vorthak said to his assembled staff. If there are more species like the humans, our current methods are not just ineffective, they're counterproductive. What do you recommend, sir? Zixtok asked. The Supreme Commander looked at the recordings of Sarah's casual destruction of their carefully constructed fears. We need to learn about courage, real courage, not the absence of fear, but the ability to function despite it. From the humans, he confirmed. They've mastered something we never knew existed. They've turned fear into a tool rather than a weapon. As the Wanderer jumped to hyperspace, carrying Sarah back to Earth, the Vorthok began the long process of reconstructing their understanding of the universe. They had thought they were apex predators, but they had encountered something that made them realize they were still prey. Humanity had arrived in the galaxy, and the balance of power would never be the same. On Earth, Sarah filed her report and went home to her apartment. She made coffee, fed her cat, and settled in to watch the news. There was a story about a new strain of flu, a volcanic eruption in Iceland, and a hurricane forming in the Atlantic. Just another Tuesday, she murmured, and turned up the volume. In the depths of space, the Vorthok were learning that the universe was far stranger and more dangerous than they had ever imagined. And at the center of it all was a species that had looked at a hostile cosmos and decided to make friends with it. The age of human exploration had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same. Asterisk.